Some of the photographs of the work that you've done before you thought of making work here, you did speak about the spaces that they were in, but actually I want you to speak more about them. So you alluded to people having to move round them, or that these different perspectives are incredibly important to you. Sort of fascinating for a choreographer, because in the main, we're the ones that move. So although I'm now encouraging people to come and see our work in art galleries, and therefore the audience can move around it, we could be tricky customers, because we could keep moving as well. Whereas you're the delicious stability that the work is there, but by being there still gives us the illusion of movement in itself while we're walking around, is such a good thought. But you and I have spoken more about how you contemplate space when you bring an object to it.
Yeah.
And I want you to carry on that conversation in front of more people.
It's something that's always been a sort of starting point, really, of I'll make a work that can exist in various spaces, but I'll spend a really long time in that space that I leave it in, trying to figure out sort of the different elements of what makes it right to sort of rest in sort of that corner as opposed to there, and that all depends on, I guess, the architecture and sort of where someone will walk in, you know, different ways that not only the architecture of the building, but the placement of the object can kind of force someone to walk around the room in a certain way, and using that as a kind of tool in some of the works, the sort of much older works actually, using that as a tool to kind of force particular viewing perspectives that I really wanted someone to see, because of the form of the work. It relied a lot on sort of illusion or different kind of depths, and to ensure that someone would see it the way I wanted them to depended a lot on that placement, I think.
Okay, so I'm trying to align that a little bit to how I might think. Some of the time I'm very aware that I am, when making work, there is an activity held by the performer, and the eye is drawn to that activity. But if I don't think at the same time of where that activity is proportionally in the space of the room, or proportionately with the person who might not be there yet or will be there, so those tensions between the movement of two people, but the stability possibly of the architecture or the space around it is an oscillating tension all the time. So in part, are you saying your oscillating tension is between the architecture and the potential movement of the viewer that comes in?
Yeah, I think it depends. It will change in each space, and it will change depending on what I have and which objects I have. Even working here, it was more of a kind of quieter activity of me sitting in the space and looking and absorbing and kind of getting a sense of those subtle details or the kind of little things that open up to you, and that's possibly what I'm more interested in. So, for example, with this paneling work, even just coming in since it's been up, and just being here on maybe a really sunny day and kind of feeling that sense of time and just existing, it's more of a kind of personal thing rather than an activity. But it's interesting to see how things happen around it. And
we talked about, there was an element that you might use the word design in this, because now I want you to carry on the sentence, because I think you've partly answered it. I'm trying to make sure that every answer is because you and I know, we've had a conversation before. I want to make quite sure that everybody here hears the completeness of how you have thought about everything that has come into this building, because I think it's incredibly valuable to us, the thoughtfulness in the simplicity of the objects that have arrived in here. So can you talk a little bit more? You have spoken about it. I'm just wanting to keep teasing more about the sense of the design and this delicious idea of an incompleteness that has arrived and yet feels extraordinarily powerful in here.
I think, I mean, it's, when Sarah designed the building, there was clearly so much thought and detail that she put into every single part of it, and all of those bits start to kind of emerge the more you just spend time here, the more there's there's a lot of subtleties. There's even things that I noticed, just coming into the office the other day, sort of, there's so much here, and it's all, I suppose, whatever I put into it, I didn't feel it had to kind of work with it. It had to sort of become more of a counterpart of whatever is here, as another layer on top of whatever's here, because the building is structured in terms of, there's so many layers going on. You've got this old schoolhouse, and you've got, this new design on top of it, and there's so many parts and sections to it. Even in the staircase, there's sort of these kind of patchworking windows. There's so much on top of one another that I kind of felt that whatever I did had to become another part of that. And all of it's quite disconnected as well. It's quite a confusing thing to walk into, because it takes a while to kind of settle into it. And I suppose I was thinking of just sort of adding to that.
So that's why you have three elements. Is that one of the reasons why you have three elements in the show? The objects, the photographs, and the screen prints?
Possibly, yeah. I mean,
do you want to talk about those three elements and how they connect, or how they sit with each other?
I suppose they don't. They have very many thin sort of connections to one another. They're not works that I would necessarily fit together at all. But then again, I thought this space kind of lends it to the ability, I think, to be able to just do things like that. And I mean, for me, the main kind of work is the paneling on the staircase, and then the other sort of props, I suppose, the hoops, the bar, that's a kind of other element of just objects about the space. And then the prints are something completely separate, really, and I almost envisage them as something, almost two different shows or something elsewhere, but it's because that is a separate part of the building. I suppose it's sort of highlighting, taking on from that, it's looking at what isn't, the kind of the details of the space that Sarah's created. It's sort of looking at the things that aren't here as well, or the kind of the way which she's added onto the building. And there's these kind of, the surface of the brick, the kind of bits of the window where things are missing, and the whole building itself, in some strange solid sense, does seem quite fragile as well. It was nice to kind of have that sort of silent collaborative partner in some ways, and have a kind of project to sort of make something for a space, which is very different from a lot of the work that I've made before in terms of the way I've shown work. So that was quite exciting, an exciting challenge, and a really refreshing way to sort of work and have a break from the way I've worked before.
I like the idea of being a silent collaborative partner. I think that's such a yeah, I'm going to treasure that one.